75 million nights. Gone. Not borrowed, not deferred, not shifted to next season. Gone from the British economy permanently. That is the number of domestic holiday nights this country has lost since 2022. And it is not a statistic buried in a think tank report that nobody reads. It is the sound of a campsite in Whitby that used to be full every August now sitting half empty. It is the B&B in St. Ives, whose owner worked 30 years to build something, watching July bookings come in at a third of what they were 4 years ago, and it is happening at exactly the same moment that £2.2 billion in international tourism revenue has quietly evaporated from our economy. Two crises, same cause, and a government that has not yet admitted either of them is real. Tonight we are going to look at both. Stay with me. Let's start at the place that Britain still uses as its calling card to the world. Heathrow, 84 million passengers in 2025. The government announces this number with something approaching pride, and you can understand why. It is a large number. But numbers are only meaningful in context, and the context here is devastating. While Heathrow managed a growth rate of 0.7%, Istanbul's airport grew at 6%. That is not a slight difference. Istanbul is growing at 8 times our rate, and Heathrow is already running at 98% runway capacity. There is almost no physical room to add more flights. The airport is full, and it is going nowhere. What this means in practice is something economists have started calling the aviation mummy, a structure that looks alive from the outside, massive and operational, but hollowed out economically from within. Walk through Terminal 5 on a Tuesday afternoon and you will see exactly what they mean. The infrastructure is magnificent, the architecture is impressive, but the luxury retail units that were once the financial engine of the terminal, the watches, the handbags, the perfumes, stand largely empty, staff outnumbering customers. The travelers who do pass through are connecting onward to Paris, Madrid, or Dubai. They are using Britain as a corridor, not as a destination. They arrive, they transit, and they leave, spending nothing of consequence on the way through, and the reason they are spending nothing is not complicated. It is a single policy decision made in January 2021 that the government has refused to revisit despite 5 years of evidence of the damage it causes. When Britain left the European Union, it abolished VAT-free shopping for international visitors. Every other major tourism economy in the world, France, Italy, Spain, Germany, still offers it. The calculation for a high-spending visitor from America or China is now brutally simple. A handbag that costs £2,000 in London comes with no refund. The same bag purchased in Paris comes with a refund of between £240 and £400 returned to you at the airport on the way home. That is not a marginal difference. That is a reason to book a Eurostar instead of spending the afternoon on Bond Street. And that is exactly what is happening. 96% of West End businesses have reported that international high-spending customers have redirected their shopping to EU cities. Selfridges has recorded a 7% drop in revenue, more than £774 million gone from a single retailer. Burberry and Mulberry, brands whose identity is built entirely on Britishness, are now at a structural competitive disadvantage in their own home market. The Galeries Lafayette in Paris is reporting double-digit growth. London's Bond Street is becoming, as one retail analyst put it, the world's most expensive showroom, a place people visit to look and try on, then cross the channel to actually buy. We are financing Paris's retail renaissance with our own policy choices. And while all of this has been happening, Visit Britain's promotional budget, the fund that is supposed to tell the world why they should come here, has been cut by 44% down to just £10.5 million. For context, that is less than the cost of a single night's accommodation for a medium-sized delegation attending a conference. It is not a budget, it is a gesture. The impact on international visitor spending tells the full story. In 2024, international visitors spent £4.3 billion in the UK, already 5.3% below pre-pandemic 2019 levels. That $2 billion gap represents hotel rooms that sat empty, restaurant covers that were never filled, taxi journeys that were never taken, and jobs in the service industry that were never created or were quietly cut. The Treasury has looked at this number and concluded, apparently, that the administrative complexity of running a VAT refund system outweighs the economic cost of losing it. That calculation does not survive contact with the evidence. But it persists. Now, step away from the airport and the West End, and let's talk about what is happening to the Britain that most British people actually live in and holiday in, because the collapse of international tourism is only half of this story. The other half is the disappearance of something that used to define this country's summers, the Great British Holiday. Since 2022, 75 million domestic holiday nights have been lost. When you adjust that for inflation, the spending collapse in domestic tourism is worth £3 billion. Not a rounding error. £3 billion that used to circulate through coastal towns and countryside villages and market towns, through their cafes and their hire shops and their independent hotels, simply no longer arriving. The reason is straightforward, and the government is largely responsible for it. A long weekend in Cornwall for a family of four, travel, accommodation, food, activities, now costs more than a week in Mallorca, including the flights. That is not because Cornwall has become more expensive in isolation. It is because the tax structure in this country has made it so. International flights are exempt from fuel duty. Domestic tourism businesses, the B&Bs, the caravan parks, the seaside restaurants pay full VAT, full business rates, full energy costs with no meaningful relief. The government has, in effect, built a subsidy system that rewards British families for spending their holiday money in the Mediterranean and penalizes them for spending it in Scarborough or Tenby or Filey. This is not an accident of the market. It is a policy outcome. The places absorbing this collapse are among the most economically fragile communities in England: Blackpool, Whitstable, Skegness, the Isle of Sheppey. These are not places with diversified economic bases that can absorb a 30% drop in seasonal revenue. For many of them, the summer tourist trade is the economic year. When it falls away, the consequences are immediate. Businesses that close in October and do not reopen in April, seasonal workers who do not return, local suppliers who lose their largest customers. Coastal tourism areas have collectively lost £1, 4 billion in a single 12-month period. And the families who used to holiday there, working-class families for whom Mablethorpe or Ryle was the annual holiday, the thing the children looked forward to, the week that held the year together, those families are now either going abroad because it is cheaper or not going anywhere at all because neither option is affordable. The Great British Holiday, which was never a luxury, is becoming one. Meanwhile, London is undergoing its own quiet transformation, and not in the direction the tourism brochures suggest. Google's travel search data shows a 2% decline in searches for London flights and hotels. That number may sound modest. In global tourism terms, it is an alarm. London now ranks 14th in the world for overall visitor cost, above Paris by between 25% and 33% across the full experience. A hotel room in London averages £190 per night. The equivalent in Paris is £150. A restaurant meal in London runs 20 to 25% above Paris prices. A single public transport journey costs between £2.80 and £3.10, compared to £2.15 in Paris. A pint of beer in central London now regularly costs between £6 and £7.50. These are not premium luxury costs. These are the everyday costs of a normal visit, and they are driving normal visitors away. The alternatives they are choosing instead tell their own story. Searches for Tokyo are up 64%, Rio de Janeiro up 61%, Seville up 43%. These are not like-for-like competitors with London, they are simply places where a visitor feels they are getting something in return for what they spend. London's problem is not that it lacks things to offer. It is that the experience gap between what visitors pay and what they receive has become too wide to ignore. Crime statistics, a transport network that has been underinvested for a decade, the replacement of independent cultural institutions with high-rent chain retail, all of it accumulates into an impression of a city that has stopped caring whether visitors come. The hotel sector is showing the strain with a precision that cannot be argued with. Revenue per available room in London fell 2% in 2025. But the more revealing figure is what has happened to peak nights. The occasions when occupancy exceeds 90%, when the city is genuinely full and hotels can charge premium rates. In 2019, there were 59 such nights across the year. By 2025, that number had fallen to 18. Projected occupancy for April 2026 is 28%. For May, what should be the beginning of peak season, it is 19%. That means in the months when London hotels should be turning away guests, 4 in every 5 rooms will be empty. Travelodge and Whitbread have both issued formal warnings about the scale of booking cancellations. The budget segment, the hotels that serve families, school groups, domestic visitors, people who are not oligarchs, is in genuine distress. And into this crisis, local authorities have chosen this precise moment to introduce a visitor levy of £2 per room per night. It will not raise meaningful revenue. It will provide one more reason for price-sensitive visitors to choose somewhere else. The border has become part of the problem in ways that few people foresaw and the government has been slow to acknowledge. The Electronic Travel Authorization Scheme, introduced to streamline entry, requires visitors from previously exempt countries, including EU member states whose citizens once crossed with an ID card, to pay between £10 and £20 before they can travel. The psychological effect on short-break tourism from Europe has been significant. A spontaneous weekend trip to London from Amsterdam or Brussels now requires advanced planning, an online application, and a fee. The friction is not enormous, but in tourism, friction kills impulse decisions. And the short European city break was built almost entirely on impulse. The events of February 2026 made the border situation impossible to ignore. Dual nationals, British citizens who hold residency in EU countries, were required, without adequate notice, to pay up to £589 for residency documentation simply to return to the country they hold citizenship of. Airlines, facing fines for carrying passengers without correct paperwork, refused boarding to people at departure gates in Spain and Australia. Families were separated. People missed funerals and medical appointments. The images of British citizens queuing at their own embassy because a border system failed them are not images that a tourism economy recovers from quickly. A country that cannot reliably let its own citizens come home does not project the message of welcome that visitors require. And beneath all of this, the border complexity, the cost crisis, the vanishing domestic holiday, there is a workforce problem that connects directly back to the restaurant story we told last week. The hospitality skills that once made British service worth paying for were built over generations and staffed significantly by workers from across Europe who came here precisely because the industry offered them a career. Post-Brexit, roughly 120, zero of those workers left the sector. The training infrastructure to replace them was never built. So what visitors encounter now, when they do come, in the hotels, in the restaurants, in the transport hubs, is an industry staffed by people who are doing their best under conditions of chronic underinvestment in training and pay. Service standards that Britain once had reason to be proud of have become a source of complaint in review after review on every booking platform. By 2027, analysts project that Bond Street will function as a showroom, a place where people look at things they will buy elsewhere. The cultural institutions, the independent shops and galleries and music venues that gave London its identity beyond the postcard landmarks, are being priced out of existence by commercial rents that only luxury chains can meet. What we are watching is not a natural disaster. It is not a global trend that Britain is helpless to resist. Every specific mechanism that is draining this economy of its tourism revenue, the VAT refund abolition, the promotional budget cut, the domestic tax structure that penalizes staycations, the border friction, the visitor levy, is a policy choice that was made by people in offices in Whitehall, and every one of them can be unmade. The question is whether the political will exists to look at the evidence honestly enough to do it. Tell me in the comments, when did you last take a holiday in Britain? And if you used to and you stopped, what changed? I think the answers in that thread will tell a more complete story than any government report currently being produced. If this investigation connected with something you have been feeling but could not put into numbers, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, because we are not finished. There are more parts of this picture still to examine, and we will be back next week to keep looking.